Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Danielle Duclos, and I am the Senior Vice President of Marketing for Bluefin. I wanted to thank you all for joining today's webinar, The Silver Bullet for E-commerce Security, 3DS, Encryption, and Tokenization. Today's discussion will last approximately 45 minutes, with 15 minutes allotted at the end to take questions. To ask a question, simply type into the question pane on the right-hand side of your screen. Questions that we are not able to answer due to time constraints will be addressed in a follow-on email to attendees. A copy of the presentation accompanying the session is available in the handout section of the webinar. Additionally, we are recording the webinar and it will be posted on our website this week. We will send you a link when it has been posted so that you may share it with your colleagues. I'm pleased to welcome today's speakers, Rustin Miles, Adam Gluck, and Stephen Orfe. Rustin founded Bluefin and has over 20 years of payment and security experience, including architecting Bluefin's payment gateway and PCI-validated point-to-point encryption solutions, as well as contributing to the innovation of the company's tokenization solutions. Rustin is a national speaker on cyber and payment security topics and was featured in more than 15 publications in 2020, including Yahoo, Dark Reading, TechCrunch, and more. Adam is the CTO and Chief Product Officer of Pay. He is a seasoned emerging payments executive and multiple patent holder. Over the course of his career, he has led product and engineering teams at MasterCard that developed and commercialized the EMV solution, the MasterPass wallet, and the Open Payments Transit product. Stephen Orfe serves as Bluefin's and Pay's strategic advisor and is a recognized industry expert in global payment platforms, E&M commerce, transit, and cybersecurity. He has testified before Congress as a cybersecurity expert, served as a representative of the United States at the G7 Roma Lion Group of World Leaders on Card Crimes, participated in U.S. presidential cybersecurity summits, and he is called on regularly for his expertise by government, law enforcement, industry groups, and the media. Stephen, I will hand it over to you to introduce the Bluefin and Pay relationship and today's agenda.
Okay, thanks very much, Danielle. I appreciate that. And I'm sure everybody's terribly impressed by the expertise of this panel. It's a pleasure to be with you today. Thanks for coming out. The story behind these two companies coming together in a collaboration is really, I'll speak first to my relationship with Bluefin and serving as a strategic advisor. When in my capacity, some of you probably recall, I was the general manager of the PCI Council for 3 years, and very early on in that relationship, we would have community meetings around the world. And this young gentleman by the name of Rustin Miles showed up and presented encryption, and I thought to myself, you know, here's a guy who can not only articulate this value proposition, incredibly smart, but really help people get their arms around it, and in particular, the small and mid-sized businesses. So I said going forward that he would be presenting at all of our community meetings, and we had become very good friends. At the time that I separated from PCI, Bluefin offered me the opportunity to chair their product advisory committee, and I've been in that capacity ever since. And it's really a privilege to do that because I think that Bluefin is by far and away the exceptional encryption and tokenization expert in the payment security space. And I've had the pleasure of working with their CEO, John Perry, and Tim Barnett, and Greg Cornwall. Really an interesting and very smart security payments organization. My time with Adam Gluck goes back even further. As some of you may know, I did about 14 years with MasterCard as a senior vice president of emerging payment platforms, and was responsible for building a lot of their products, particularly in the security space. And one of the great things we accomplished over there was Adam led our team on the automated fare collection transit solution. So for many of you out there, when you tap and go and get on a bus or a subway car or a train, you know, that was something that Adam was the chief engineer on back, and we actually piloted that in 2006. You know, it's amazing as the city that we piloted in is now just finally implementing it, New York City. So Adam and I go way back, and it's an absolute pleasure to work with him once again in a product capacity. And I have to say my compliments to the folks over at Pay, their technology and really their frictionless approach at authentication and working with their CEO, Yitz Menowitz, who's just, pure energy. So I think this collaboration and being put in the role of advising to these two organizations allowed me to first pull these two gentlemen in the room and say, we really ought to collaborate and put together an end-to-end solution that's as close as you can get to a silver bullet. And I think that's what we've done. And so that's what we're going to talk to you about today. And hopefully it'll be mildly entertaining and informative. So here's our agenda. You've met the experts. That's the little Bluefin and Pay story of how we came together to collaborate and integrate our solutions. I'm going to talk at a very high level about the combined solution set. Then we're going to speak to the challenges that, we see what you see out there in the marketplace. And then we're going to drill down a little bit on the value adds and explain how it works. And very important, like most solutions, if you can explain it and you can implement it, the elegance is really in the simplicity of the implementation. We'll talk to that a bit, and then we'll look to open up the floor and take some of your questions, hopefully time permitting. So the title, The Silver Bullet, really, I just touched on that. So is there really such a thing as a silver bullet? No, not really. But I think we're as close as you can get. Now, if you think of the point-to-point environment or I should say, the face-to-face environment, you've got EMV, you've got encryption and tokenization, which makes that an incredibly secure transaction and has really driven down fraud in the marketplace. Now, if we can transpose that model, and that's what we've done, and we've done that with Pay and our collaboration with Bluefin to do exactly that. This solution set. Now, this slide's a little wonky, and the reason for that is, that's because it's one of my slides. It's things that I like to talk to, and just kind of simplifies things for me. I'm always looking to simplify things for the small and mid-sized merchant. So we came together in this collaboration, and you've got these two great companies, Bluefin that does exceptional work on encryption and tokenization and confidentiality of data. And then you've got this startup high energy company that does authentication, strong authentication in a way that's frictionless. And, wouldn't it be wonderful to put this solution together end to end and provide it and simplify the lives of the merchant community? And that's exactly what we've done. So if you look at this slide, and it is mine, but okay, so what we've done here is with Pay at the front door with their 3DS2 solution, we strongly authenticate. We provide a liability shift, a guaranteed payment. We reduce chargebacks. We authenticate that cardholder to the issuer so that a guaranteed payment can be extended to the merchant. And that adds a lot of value, drives down chargebacks, increases authorizations, and really it's the perfect front door to have in front of Bluefin. Now, Bluefin on the other side of that equation, from the point of interaction, will encrypt, will wrap that data in encryption, and then we'll tokenize the data at rest. And so for some of the folks out there who come to us from the hospitality or the healthcare industry or under other industries where you need to encrypt additional data elements, Shield Connect has the ability to do that. Rustin will talk to that in a little bit, and that can be very important, particularly for healthcare, as I see it. So you've got Pay doing the authentication, the strong authentication, and then you've got Bluefin handling all the data confidentiality through its encryption and tokenization. And then what you really have to think about, in my mind, is that this is one integration, but perhaps more importantly, one of the biggest challenges here is not just the bad guys, because we built a solution that takes on the bad guys, but we also take on the regulators, and the regulators can be probably is an immense challenge, and we're going to talk to that in a bit. Okay, I think we'll go to the next slide. Okay, so we see what you see. Danielle, I went back to my brilliant slide. Okay, there we go. We see what you see in the marketplace. These are extremely difficult times. We all don't need to remind one another. It's not just enough to be a merchant and try and serve your customer and get your goods delivered and deal with all the issues of supply chain and everything else. But you've got two extreme challenges out in the marketplace that you also have to step up to. And one of those is the hacker community. And so when you devalue data, you make it useless in the hands of criminals, organized crime, and in some rare instances, state-funded actors. And so you see these attacks coming, and it's the attack vectors. We're all very familiar with them: social engineering, spear phishing, ransomware, malware, and now we're even seeing an uptick in the insider attacks. So there's a lot of challenges there, and Rustin's going to speak to those momentarily. But then I wanted to just spend a moment, if I may, on the regulatory challenges. So there's so many acronyms in this business, and hopefully we don't have to go through all those. But when you look at regulatory now, perhaps the biggest and overriding challenge is meeting the GDPR requirements. And what makes GDPR really quite unique is not only its privacy and its its penalties. If you think about it, they can penalize, they can impose fines of up to 2% of a company's global revenue stream. And if you're not paying attention to that, well, you really need to. And then there's PSD2, which is the Payment Services Directive, which if you're doing business in Europe, if you're any of the merchants out there, you're going to have to step up here and do strong customer authentication. So then you also have PCI. Now, PCI, having served as a general manager, you have over 340 controls that you have to manage to be compliant. Now, when you implement the solutions that we're talking about today, we take that down by 90% of those controls. So we give you a very manageable control set that you have to work with. Also, you have the state of California with its California Consumer Protection Act, very similar to GDPR thinking. And then you have the ICO. The ICO is the Information Commissioner's Office in the UK and in Europe, and that's the guy you don't want to be standing before explaining, if you were breached. So this solution, look, folks, there's a good chance you're going to be breached. The real question is, are you going to be compromised? And so with our solution, we're going to take all those things off the table and allow you to stand before that ICO and say that you have taken the appropriate measures, both at a systemic and an organizational level. So those challenges we see, the hacker community, the regulatory environment, immense. Now I'm going to pass it over to Russ, and he's going to drill down a little bit on what's going on in the hacker community. Over to you, Russ.
Thanks a lot, Stephen. Appreciate the introduction there as well. So yeah, hackers go where the money go. If we've been given this presentation even a little bit more than a year ago, this is where we'd be talking about the 1,000+ breaches per year for the last almost decade, right? Hitting the retail sector, restaurant sector, healthcare, higher education, all the different sectors, right? With malware getting in anywhere it can get in order to siphon out card data, sell it on the dark web for $40 to $80, sometimes more. We'll talk about that. And then in turn, the fraudsters buy this and they go out and they use it to make purchases, right? Either online or in person and do these different things. And so we need to be real, look back over the last year. Maybe breaches have been going down in a number of terms, a number of breaches of major retailers in the news. And we all know that's because of the pandemic, right? And the fact that there are not a lot of cards being transacted in these places. And so, but that doesn't mean that the hackers aren't still getting their malware there. It doesn't mean that their malware isn't still there. It just means that a lot of times they're laying in the weeds. And this is interesting because right now, if we look at the IBM, sponsored data breach report here through Ponemon, the Ponemon Institute that comes out once a year. This year, or last year, was sponsored by IBM. 280 days, right? The time to identify and contain a breach. That means that a lot of these retailers have had a breach going on. Cards have been getting siphoned this whole time before they even know it. And that really adds to the impact. Boy, it's really bad to have a breach, but it's really, really bad to have a breach. It's going to be going on for almost a year. And I see this number, and it certainly becomes, almost obvious to me that this is probably going to be something that we see extended greatly next year, or let's just say this year, as we go into a post-pandemic environment. Retailers and restaurants and all sorts of businesses that have been breached and may have been breached even earlier last year, have had malware and systems that are vulnerable to attack and have been attacked that are ready, willing, and just waiting for the red lights to come back on the systems and turn back on, and suddenly cards start flowing back out of the system. So I think we're going to see 280 days is already just horrific, but I think we're going to see a bump in that. We go over and we look at the average cost of a breach. Looking back again, reports are always done in arrears. 3.82 million. Gosh, that's really bad. But take that 288 days out to 400 days or more. Those costs of breaches are going up. We're also seeing the average cost loss per record going up, especially in sectors where the data is more rich, right? Yeah, it's important to get credit card information and the PAN and all the bad things you can do with that. But isn't it nice over here in the healthcare industry or higher education or insurance or something like this, where there's additional information, PII, PHI, all this personal information that can be used to conduct a more perfect, from the hacker's perspective, identity theft or identity takeover. So now they have all this information, and at the end of the day, hackers go where the money goes. They want to have that information so they can sell it on the dark web for more than $80, right? They want to sell it for $100, $150, $200, $300 on the dark web, and someone's going to go off and try to do an identity theft that's going to maybe take someone for tens of thousands of dollars. So we're seeing these areas being attacked where there's more rich data to go along with it. And again, we're also seeing regulations, as Stephen pointed out, going towards that. And also 80% of these breaches share information and records that also contain important PII. So we're only seeing that trend continue as, again, the hackers go where the money goes. So, I think we look back over the last year, and while the total breach count might be down, what are we seeing? We're seeing a lot of these hackers and fraudsters move over to e-commerce, and we're also seeing chargebacks going up. We're also seeing chargebacks go up because we have a lot of merchants who traditionally had worked largely in retail and face-to-face and card present, and now because of the pandemic, they are moving to work from home environments, card not present environments, e-commerce environments, which are overloading their fraud and their protection mechanisms and their security protection mechanisms. For example, maybe you're a restaurant and only 10% of your business was online or e-commerce before. You flip that and 100% of it's online. Now any small holes or threats that you had before can affect a much larger degree of your transactions, and your fraud protections can get overwhelmed and data protections can get overwhelmed. So we're seeing some of that getting lost as hackers, again, go where they can get the most and the quickest. With that, I guess we'll talk a little bit about the authorization side of this, and I'll pass it over to Adam.
Thanks, Rustin. Thank you, Steve. It's a pleasure kind of sharing the stage with you guys. I feel a little bit in awe of both of you, so thanks for that opportunity. When Steve and I joined MasterCard, and we joined about the same time in the mid-90s, most of the security around payments revolved around that piece of plastic and what was on it. So when credit cards came up from their nascent to the 90s, as fraudsters got more sophisticated, the card got more sophisticated. You went to embossed numbers, and then it went to a mag stripe, and then it went to high coercivity, and then they went to having the CVC or the CVV on the card, so there'd be numbers that weren't obvious to the pan. They added things like the hologram. All of this were efforts, and successful at the time efforts, to reduce face-to-face fraud. At the time, MasterCard, Visa, the payment industry at large could afford to ignore things that weren't face-to-face. The MODO environment, as we used to refer to it, mail order, telephone order, was small. So the fact that we could get 98% authorization when we went online face-to-face was fine. And the fact that it was worse offline at the time, people were willing to live with. Well, when the internet really exploded in the mid-90s, late 90s, the internet started growing. All of a sudden, the fact that you were getting 98% authorization rates face-to-face, but only 82% authorization rates online, that became a real noticeable, important problem to solve. Steve and I participated. We worked in groups that were tasked with solving that problem. E-commerce and chip and contactless and all kinds of things to help e-commerce merchants combat this big problem. Because unlike face-to-face transactions where the issuer bears the brunt of the responsibility to deal with fraud and attacks, in the e-commerce world, the merchant bore that brunt. So the products that were necessary that came out of the payment associations were products that the merchants had to embrace. And whether you looked at it as lost sales or number of declines, this was a very big problem that needed to be addressed. Danielle, can you advance? And even today, if you think in terms of, we tend to think of this in terms of two metrics. There is the metric where we measure how much cost there is to this fraud. And we tend to talk largely about chargeback. If a consumer does a transaction and then disputes it, typically, more often than not, that's typically a friendly fraud scenario. And whenever there is a chargeback like that, it's interesting when you start doing the calculations, the expense to the merchant far exceeds the expense of the goods. So if I spend $1 and I charge it back, typically that'll end up costing the merchant, in today's numbers, $3.36. And by the way, this slide is reporting at $3.13, the number from 2019. LexisNexis just updated that statistic in the past couple of weeks, and that value is $3.36. And you would ask, wait a minute, if that person just charged back $1, why does this end up costing me $3 and change? And the answer is you don't just pay for the chargeback. You pay for the chargeback. You pay for the shipping costs. You pay for the goods that may or may not make their way back. You pay the penalties and the fees that the associations levy against you, that the acquirers levy against you. A chargeback, as far as the issuers and the acquirers and MasterCard and Visa are concerned, is a bad thing. It reduces consumer confidence. They make it really, really onerous when there's a chargeback to the merchant. And this doesn't even account for in that money the fact that merchants run the risk of losing their mids, right? So there's a lot of expense in these chargebacks that really need to be addressed. And I'm sorry, and the other part of the story is what's happening today with COVID-19. All of a sudden, merchants that were, let's say, content, maybe factum and happy like me, to be face-to-face merchants and, living in that 98% authorization rate world, well, all of a sudden, they don't have that anymore. They don't have foot traffic. COVID-19 caused a shift in the world where face-to-face merchants, if they wanted to survive, needed to move online. And all of a sudden, they weren't living in a 98% issuers bear the risk world. They were living in an 82% authorization rate. Oh my God, I bear the risk world. So there's a real need for these merchants to have the right tool set to be able to combat the fraudsters in this environment that's new to them. So with that, back to you, Rustin.
Thanks, Adam. Yeah, and Stephen laid it out in the beginning that we do see the trifecta of authentication, strong authentication, tokenization, and encryption as sort of that front door of protection. So certainly it's important to combine a solution, right? And that's what we've done to bring together an integrated offering, an integrated solution. But I think it's important to note here that we really believe this is a strategic partnership, a strategic solution. You hear the term, eating your own dog food. It's interesting to note these organizations are eating each other's dog food, if you can use the term, and that might sound weird, but we are using each other's technology baked into our own systems, right? So the pay system is using the Shield Connect's tokenization to protect it. The Bluefin Shield Connects and gateway systems are using the authentication technologies that Pay provides in order to protect our merchants. So this is a true partnership, not just two software kind of security and authentication fraud providers out there saying, wouldn't it be cool if we combined forces and got some marketing bang out of this? This is a true partnership with real integrated, solution together, who both believe in each other's organizations and are advancing that for our own protection, for our own customers, and really thought it'd be important to bring this out to you all in this format. So with that, Adam, can you why don't you go ahead and kick us off with maybe discussing a little bit about this integrated solution we brought together?
Yeah, I'd be happy to, Rustin. The one point I just realized that I didn't mention that I wanted to bring up based on that last slide was we are not only a partner of yours, so that 3DS is offered through your product, we are also a consumer of that Shield Connect solution. We moved to the Bluefin vaultless tokenization solution. It saved us money, it saved us time, it was an easy implementation. I know I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but just as a customer of Bluefin as well, I would say our migration and the use of your product, to that last slide of like eating my own dog food, it was really a positive experience. So yeah, we're happy to partner and offer this to the world at large, but I also just wanted to offer you guys a small commercial and say, as a customer of Bluefin, this was a really, really positive experience. As we talk about this integrated solution set, we want to talk about the benefits it brings, and they do both help reduce the expenses to the merchants and the customers, and they also help with the bottom line. So to start, Danielle, if you don't mind giving me a flip. What we're seeing when we implement a 3DS solution is that 90% of all the transactions the merchant does will be getting a liability shift. This is a really powerful tool. Now, it is a tool that's attractive to the Treasury Department and the technical folks because it really helps stem losses. It doesn't introduce new business, but it stems losses in a really powerful way. When you use 3DS to get protection in a transaction, not only are you protected from that chargeback, but you actually are protected from having to deal with processing the chargeback response. So for those of you in the weeds of payments, when you get a chargeback as a merchant, not only is it expensive, but there's a whole ton of things you need to do to comply and respond to that. One of the magical things about implementing 3DS is you never see that chargeback. A transaction protected with 3D Secure means that you as a merchant, when that issuer gets that complaint from that consumer, they bear the liability for it. So this 90% of protection on all transactions is a super powerful, super beneficial benefit. I'm like struggling with my words today, to merchants. And with that, I better slip to the next slide before I stumble again. Now, I talked about the previous tile flip was about how to save money and reduce expense. This next slide is even more important. With the evolution of 3DS, as 3DS has evolved, it's a technology that's been around for quite some time, more than a decade, but the recent iteration of it, as it moved to what is referred to as version 2 or EMV 3DS, this new version of it adds a whole bunch of information to the transaction. It provides issuers with a richer data set in order to do authorizations. Initial data from MasterCard and Visa shows up to a 10% increase in the authorization rate. So not only did it help you reduce expenses, but it also helps you increase your bottom line. And that is just such a huge benefit. Now, over time, that's going to get a lot more press. We're just happy to be here now, being able to bring you that benefit. Danielle? So one of the things that EMV 3DS does, which a year ago was a bit of a sideshow for us largely, was it implements strong customer authentication. Strong customer authentication, for those of you who don't know, brings 2 additional factors into the transaction so that the consumer can identify that they are actually the person that's entitled to use that payment credential. And right now, the way it's best described is that I, as a consumer, will present 2 out of the next 3 following things in order to demonstrate to the issuer that I'm entitled to do this transaction. It's either something that I am, something that I have, or something that I know. By this, it means something that I am would be like a biometric, a fingerprint, an eye print, keystroke monitoring, something that would be uniquely me in my glory. It's something that I have. It could be my phone, or it could be my card, but it's something that I should uniquely have. And the combination of these 2 things lets the issuer have confidence that, yeah, Adam's trying to do this transaction, not, the robber. And the third one is something I know, and this is a very traditional thing. It's a password. It's my, first street that I grew up on. It's my first pet. So any 2 of these 3 factors can be used to do strong customer authentication. Why am I spending so much time talking about this to you right now? Sounds a little self-serving, sounds a little boring. I'm putting Steve to sleep, I think. Well, strong customer authentication became critically important, and for us payment nerds, critically exciting about a year ago when the Europeans announced PSD2. With the announcement of PSD2, which does a lot of things to open banking in Europe, but one of the things that's completely relevant here is it said when you do an e-commerce transaction, you must, Mr. Issuer, make sure you do strong customer authentication. So it's no longer about liability shift for the merchant. It's no longer just about increasing authorization rates for the merchant. PSD2 basically says, you, Mr. Issuer, if you don't do it, you're going to get penalized. You're going to get fined. You must do this. So if you're a merchant that is acquired in Europe, this is now technology that was a nice to have before January 1st, and as of January 1st is really becoming a must have. Now, the date was delayed a bunch of times, and last officially was launched with a mandate on January 1st. Various countries throughout Europe have introduced various delays, which make the world super complicated. But largely what we're telling the merchants we do business with is, look, you can't be sure in any given transaction whether this is critical or not. So just build it in now, have it there, and protect yourself. Because the risk is you're going to see loss of business if you don't. With that, Russ, I feel like I just gave all my magic away. I'm going to hand it off to you. So that was the warm up, bud. Bring it home. Bring it home.
All right, here we go. Thanks for that, Adam. So anybody who's probably heard me talk since 2012 knows that I've been a wild man in the wilderness, talking about encryption and tokenization, right? The 1-2 punch, encryption, tokenization, devalue the data, bring down that PCI scope. And it's all been from this world of payments, which has been important, right? Because a lot of those breaches that we talked about earlier, those thousands of breaches, were payment card data that was being breached. So it was very, very prominent, very, very much in the news. We know that this private information, personal information, and health information is on a tear now as well. And not only that, you've got all the different compliance things coming this way. And so we need to be able to protect the business. Solutions for that but solutions that can protect the whole business. And I can't tell you, it's happened many times before where we'd be all fired up and we get into, maybe a big healthcare system and we'd say, we have got the solution for you for payment security, right? And we're in there, and it sure enough is, and we're getting the nods and the attaboys and everything, and it's, yep, this is the right solution. You have just fixed 10% of our problem. So you have fixed 20% of our problem, and that's a frustrating place to be for a solution kind of guy, to be like, man, we've got the perfect solution for something that's not the biggest problem for this healthcare or for this higher education. They've got all this other data. So, we're going to talk to a little bit about what the tiles say here in a minute, but I want to point out that this is something new. The Shield Connects solution in conjunction with the pay system here is available, and we're doing the tokenization and the encryption for any data in a business, right? So we can do, that social security number, that date of birth, that EIN, that banking information, things that might not be totally covered under maybe a payment standard or payment security standard, but definitely are squarely right in there for private information that you don't want to have breached and that you could get heavy fines for doing so. So we do have this solution now that can protect the whole business. And that's what's more exciting. And that's the new bit. But to go back here, in case you haven't heard about it before, encrypting that data right at the point of interaction. Right, so this is taking it right when it comes in, and before the slide flipped, you would have seen it say hardware encryption. And wow, wait a minute, if we're doing this at the point of interaction on the web, what's the meaning of this? And what's interesting is we use that same HSM, those same hardware security modules that are used and even required really for the key management for P2P systems out in the retail and card not present. We use that same infrastructure, that same level of security, that same environment for encrypting data at the point of interaction on the web with hosted fields and these different kinds of technology in order to protect that data, to keep it out of the scope of the merchant and the merchant's website and the merchant's web servers and the merchant's own infrastructure. So it's a very important point here to note that what we're doing is taking a technology that used to only be available for the retail and bringing it together and bringing it forward for that e-commerce area and that card not present, but then also expanding that to data that's not just payments data. So there really is a lot happening here with this new platform. So on to the next tile here, we're looking at vaultless tokenization, right? So we talked about the first, which was that data at the point of entry. You better get that stuff encrypted and protected right when it comes in. But hey, what if you need to have that data be able to use it later, right? If it's a card on file, or you need to issue a refund later, or you need to do something with that data, if it's payment data or whether it's personal data or health data, you need to get access to it. Tokenization protects that data at rest. And you would have seen that there and before the slide flipped that it was called vaultless tokenization. What is that? But right, what that is really it's an economical, it's an efficient alternative to vaulted tokenization. Vaulted tokenization is that old model where all this data goes in, you get a token, and when you want some of it back, you take it back out. You might be paying rental fees on this data as it builds and amasses and accumulates in this vault. Vaultless tokenization is frankly more economical, more efficient in the way that it operates. Potentially, I think it's even faster. As Stephen pointed out, it simplifies the integration. And it really provides that PCI scope reduction, provides that protection. And again, it can be used across all the different points of business or information within a business. So that 1-2 punch here is being brought together for your entire business and for data that is not coming in through an EMV chip or from a swipe or from a tap, but data coming in from card not present environments. With that, Adam and I have been talking about this and alluding a little bit to some of these regulatory compliance things. And so I'd like to pull Stephen, if you would, back into this particular deck here or slide and maybe speak to regulatory compliance.
Okay, thank you, Russ. And as you guys have both demonstrated beautifully, I might add, the importance of the authentication, the importance of the data confidentiality, and how proficiently and efficiently you handle that. The other big threat, as I touched on earlier, is the regulatory environment, and whether that's government or industry regulatory environments that you have to comply with. You know, when you think about PCI, you've got over 340 plus controls that you have to manage to. When you implement this solution, and many of the folks that are on this call today are Bluefin customers, you know that the PCI audit is reduced by 90% and gives you a very manageable set of controls that you have to manage to. I think the biggest threat, though, to the merchant community, whether it's small, mid-size, or large, is in fact GDPR. And GDPR is not prescriptive like PCI. It essentially says, you know, you have to take appropriate measures at both a systemic and organizational level to protect sensitive data. And so implementing this solution end to end allows you to be able to stand before that commission and say, hey, I've authenticated at the front door. I've done that strongly. I've encrypted data at the point of interaction. I've tokenized data at rest. I can't think of any more comprehensive way of answering that you've taken appropriate measures. And this solution does exactly that and takes that threat off the table. As Adam also touched on PSD2, the importance and just even to do business in the European theater, you're going to have strong customer authentication, and Pay knocks that out of the park with its frictionless approach. So you know, and then if I can just reiterate, the penalties that are being levied against merchants really threaten their very existence. I mean, we're talking about up to 2% of a company's revenue stream globally. I mean, fines of 180 million. It blows my mind to think about that. The last thing you want to do is have to find yourself in front of that commission explaining your actions. We've had that in our mind front and center on how we take that challenge on and remove that pain, that pebble from your shoe. So, you know, the regulatory challenge is immense. We've taken that on. I think we've addressed it beautifully. And so I think with that, why don't we move on to the next slide then, and Rustin, you can start to take us through how this actually works.
Sure, thanks, Stephen, for that. So how does it work? We're going to keep it at a high level. Obviously, we can. We'd be happy to get involved with each and every one of you and talk about behind the scenes technologically how this can be integrated and how it's been really, in my opinion, very well thought out. And I'm really looking forward to Adam's half of this slide because I really like what they've done in implementing it and watching it being implemented. I think they really have a best-in-class way that they do it. And honestly, I did not know until I saw the implementation just how easy it was. But Shield Connects, for our part, remember what we're doing is we are trying to encrypt that data in the browser before it gets to any of the merchants, web servers, infrastructure, code, or anything like that would pull it into scope that could potentially expose it to vulnerabilities that might be laying in the weeds there from malware and other things. So what happens here is we have these hosted elements, or as they're called, or hosted fields, right? So you design your form, you design your web page the way that you'd like it. But for that special field, whether it's a social security number or a credit card number, you simply have that field in there, and that field is actually being pulled from our services, right? And when the user enters the data into that, it's going off to our system. We're encrypting that data. We're putting back an e-token back into that field that can be then used. That's being submitted off. And then it's being sent off behind the scenes, and it can be revalued, right? So here it's being devalued as tokenized, and it's just going to be revalued later when it needs to be used, either if it's being sent to Bluefin to process or any of our 125 connected payment gateways and payment processors to process. So it's very elegant in the way that still allows the web site and the merchant to be able to control the user experience, the user design, and that's really important. You know, the old model would be you get to the payment page and all of a sudden you're transported off to some other website, doesn't look like yours, you're going to get abandonment. All these things are going to happen with users when they're confused, right? With this, it's all right within your page, you own the design, but that field that you want to protect, it's embedded in there. and it's protected. So that's sort of that's the happy, it's not the happy, it's the first case, that's the main case here for within the solution. But as you might imagine, the system also can work as typically you'd see any other tokenization system out there in the market work behind the scenes with APIs, with your system sending data to our system and tokenizing it and us giving you back tokens and all this kinds of stuff. So it can work in the traditional format, but we're seeing a lot of folks get a lot of use of just embedding that and getting that encryption and that protection happening right at the point of interaction. And with that, I'd like to pass it over to Adam to tell us, well, that data is being entered in, just how seamless it is for the authentication to happen.
Well, thanks, Rustin. That's what I was going to say. When that data is getting entered in, it's really seamless for all this authentication to happen. But to be more serious, I really do think I'm a funny guy. But just anyway, the thing of it is, what we did was this: the consumer experience, and I think Rustin did a great job of explaining this. The magic here, the true magic here, in my opinion, is the consumer experience. If you're thinking UI or UX, the consumer spent 15 minutes on your site shopping for the hotel room or to pay their college fees or to pay their doctor's bill. Whatever they do on their site, the value to you really is the 15 minutes before they get to payments. Payments is the necessary evil at the very end. And what we did was this: we integrated into your payments page magic that happens behind the scenes. So we don't, as Rustin said, transport your consumer to another different looking site. We don't interrupt, we don't bother them. All the information they would enter in a standard transaction, well, whether it's Shield Connect or a Pays EMV 3DS solution, it's all happening behind the scenes transparently to that consumer as they're checking out and experiencing your website the way you want to. Now, we've done that through SDKs and APIs, and we have a variety of ways of supporting you to do it, ultimately to make you, the merchant's experience, seamless, quick, easy, dealing with us as pleasant as possible, ultimately with the goal to make sure that that consumer doesn't even know we're there. If we're successful and we protect these transactions, the consumers never know it happened. Now, as Steve was talking about PSD2 and SCA, there are now going to be places where the consumer has to be challenged and queried in order to provide that stepped-up level of security. And we've done everything we could to ensure that that is as seamless and easy and as infrequent as possible. With that,
yeah.
All you, man.
Yeah, so like Adam said, at the ease of implementation, it's and I appreciate the kudos earlier and right back at you. One of the things that was exciting to me was to watch that as the user is going through the payment page, right? The data that they're entering is being used and built and sent by Pay off to where it needs to go, so that by the time they hit that order button, you don't have these long latencies or lags. Just to process this 3DS information. And then, of course, with our system, and it's in the same way, it's happening through the AJAX calls or whatever you're going to say, from the web pages to our servers. It's all building and happening as the data is being entered, so that by the time they hit order, it's not a, please wait up to 20 seconds for all this to happen before your thing is approved, right? Please don't refresh this page. The user experience is fast, it's secure. As Stephen pointed out, the front door is protected. So I look at this solution as not just a best in breed in bringing forward that protection, but doing it in an elegant, sophisticated, but very simple to understand and simple to implement way, integrated between two best of breed partners that bring what they do from authentication to the protections of security in together for a complete package. I think that is that's something that's fresh, and that's why, as you can probably tell, I'm a little bit excited about it. So, Danielle, we'll pass it to you.
Excellent, thank you. We have a lot of questions. So the first one I want to address, and I want to make sure that we're clear. When we use the term merchant, I have a couple of questions. We have some small to medium-sized businesses on here. We have a psychiatrist office, for example. They're doing about 100,000 a month. Let's talk a little bit quickly about, the size of the business and the industry of business, and why this would be applicable not only across retail and restaurant and hospitality, but a lot of the verticals that Bluefin serves in terms of healthcare and higher education, and even SMBs.
Yeah, I'll peel off the first one of that, Danielle. So, yes, so, I've been working in this, with Bluefin for 20 years now, and we deal a lot with software providers, ISV, software as service, et cetera. So you can have a vertical of chiropractors or dentists or lawyers or healthcare or universities, et cetera. They're all using a similar software platform. So we often see it that software platform, the software provider is offering that one-to-many relationship with that technology can get in there and give the most bang for the buck for the most acceptors of payments. So that word merchant, if any of you are sort of new to it or might think of merchant accounts or merchant services as something that's what has to do with your bank, it's a term, really just a broad term that means any business that's accepting a card, any business that's accepting a card for payment. And so it's really just sort of a broad term. We typically think of retailers as card present, e-commerce, and the others as card not present. Although, as we know, with the pandemic, that's all getting mixed up, and with QR codes and folks doing different things, the ideas of face-to-face and card not present are really getting confused. But suffice it to say that the technologies that we're bringing together here serve all kinds of card acceptance businesses across all forms. And yes, we work directly with businesses that need to secure themselves, large and small, and we work through a lot of software providers that need to do that. And also, we work through a lot of other folks who you might think would be even competitors, other payment gateways and processors and providers of payment solutions that come and say, hey, we want to offer that too. We want to be able to bring these exciting technologies together to protect our merchants. And so we work in a variety of these fashions, quite frankly.
Yeah, I was going to add, Rustin, I'm a little bit sloppy with my language. I do use that word merchants quite a bit, but truly anybody that accepts a credit card as payment needs to worry about how they're securely handling it, encrypting it at the front door, encrypting it when you store it, dealing with the fact that there might be a chargeback, dealing with the fact that you need some bank to let you get paid for that, and worry about what the implications of that chargeback is. So anybody that accepts a credit card has the opportunity to take advantage of this. And I think one of the wonderful things about doing with Bluefin, from my perspective at Pay, is you guys are set up to handle both that doctor's office and that enterprise, right? Your economies and your economics, and your implementation are kind of suited to the variety of merchants you serve. So anybody that takes a card not only could use a solution like this, but is at the right place to get the service they need.
Excellent. So we have another question, and I think Adam, Stephen, this could probably go to both of you, but are you seeing increased friction in card not present transactions because of PSD2?
PSD2 at the moment has been a mess in Europe. So for those that don't understand what was going on, the EEA, or the European Economic Environment, decided they were going to do PSD2. And it had a deadline, and very European-ish, it got delayed. And then they had another deadline, and very European-ish, it got delayed. And then they had a third deadline, January 1st, and they said, we're putting our foot down. We are not delaying it. And as Steve and I know from doing business in Europe, what that actually meant was they were just pushing the decision down to the various countries. So they said, internationally, we are not delaying it. The countries can make their own decisions. So now we're in this world where theoretically the EEA has a PSD2 mandate, unless you're acquired in the UK, in which case the issuers can wait 3 weeks. Or you're in France, in which case only high value transactions qualify today, and in 2 months, lower value transactions are qualified. So we are seeing an uptick in consumers being queried in Europe, but not to the full extent. And it's really been a mixed bag. And honestly, with all these countrywide delays, it's been, quite frankly, a bit of a mess. Things are getting declined, things are getting approved, think people are getting queried. It's just a bit of a mess. It will shake out and get better over time. The only thing I can offer merchants is, look, this is about the mess that the regulatory bodies imposed on the issuers. All merchants are suffering from the same result. No one's in a better place than anyone else.
I think the
Okay.
only thing I would add to that is it makes sense. Look, if you're going to do business in the European theater, to do this work up front, integrate this solution, and have the ability to provide strong customer authentication. And that's why we've integrated the solution the way we have. Back to you, Danielle.
Excellent, thank you. And this one is a little bit, we have a couple of technical questions. We'll try to tackle what we can with the remaining time that we have on the call, and we'll do follow-ups as appropriate to the people that ask the more technical questions. But I think this one is probably interesting. It's a three-part question. Is this a global solution? If not, which countries are supported? Does it support mobile Apple Pay where the account number is not a real account? And the final part of the question, how is the solution going to support subsequent MIT transactions or stored loyalty cards?
I guess I'll take the perspective of the Shield Connects piece. Yes, the data that can be stored can be data of any type, right? Whether that's a PAN or DPAN or an FPAN or format preserved encryption PAN, depending, it doesn't really matter what it is, it can be brought in. We support various predefined formats. You can create your own formats. We got format preserving encryption formats as well that we can provide. So point being, we have lots of different ways to encrypt, store, tokenize any of the information. And yes, it can be used internationally and globally. I think the more globalization questions have to do with the kind of where Adam and Stephen were talking to, where each different region is having their own deadlines and their own approach to the implementation, whether it's a liability shift or as it might be over here in the US for chargebacks, or a straight up requirement as it might be across the European Union and some other theaters. So I think I'll pass that back to those guys to answer this from a 3DS perspective.
So I would say, Rustin, that's exactly right. I would simplify it a little bit. The EMV3DS solution, the Pay EMV3DS solution, is a global product, full stop. We are there to support our customers, resellers, merchants, or card acceptors anywhere in the world, full stop. There are various reasons why different people in the world might want to use it. Some will be based by mandate, some will be based by economics, but the solution is a global solution and it is available. I think we're in just about every continent other than Antarctica at the moment, but it's a global solution, right? So there's no qualifier, there's no ifs, there's no maybes. It absolutely is. To the third part of the question, Danielle, I need to hear that third part again. I'm a small-minded person.
Not a problem. And that was specifically the third part. Well, we've got really two parts. Is it supporting mobile Apple Pay where the account number is not a real account? So we could start there. I'm not sure, Rustin, if you kind of addressed that with Shield Connects. I think you did.
Yeah, for Shield Connects, whether it's a DPAN, FPAN, it doesn't matter what it is. If it's an issuer token or a PAR from Visa or whatever, you give us the data, we're going to encrypt it and give it back to you. Whether it's already encrypted, would you give us? We're going to double encrypt it, give it back to you. So we do support all those formats from a data protection perspective. Some might say, well, why do you need to? It's like, well, sometimes that retailer doesn't want to know whether this tapped card is not a real PAN, it's a PAR, whereas this other one's swiped and dipped, and they'd be like, why? I can encrypt this one, but I don't have to encrypt this one. Typically, retailers just say, you know what? I don't care what it is, protect it all. And so they just shove all that down, so they don't have to have this distinctions of what they should and shouldn't protect. So from that perspective, yes. I'll answer the simple answer, like Adam said, yes.
Okay, excellent.
Full stop, we can protect it all.
And Just in the interest of time, it is 3 o'clock. We're going to take a couple more questions. And Rustin, this one is specifically from you. It is a little bit technical, so we may have to defer over to our CTO, or you actually may know it, but it was specified to you directly. Rustin, could you clarify whether the data in the hosted field is encrypted client side before being sent to the Shield Connect's backend for tokenization?
I think the question we have to, first of all, we need to talk about the fact that where I think the question is going, right? Which is if you're an e-commerce provider or merchant and you provide a page, right, and you're submitting the data from that web page off to somewhere, well, it's important that that data, you know, is in your web page. If it's there, you can be vulnerable because you could have the code, you know, on your web servers attacked, et cetera. But this is different. This is hosted fields. In other words, the actual field itself is using iframe technology. It's not like the old side scroller iframes where, you know, it looks like someone else's page. It's literally just that individual credit card field, or the individual field that you want, is actually a mini web page coming from the Bluefin server. So in fact, that data is being encrypted in a web page that's being delivered inside of iframe technology that's unbeknownst to the user, or the cardholder that's looking at it, is actually just looking like it's part of the page that they're consuming. And so that point being, it's shuttled off from there, and we're encrypted. Then we pass it back out of that controller, that frame controller, to the rest of the page, right, that the merchant owns. So they never see, no part of code, no part of the web page that they've created ever actually sees the real pan. Therefore, they're out of scope. And again, the exercise here is to protect the merchant. The exercise here is to protect the providers, the processors, anybody has technology that's in there. Of course, when we look at browsers out there, there's really no way, and there's no technology that we know of that's because the browsers are made by third-party providers, right? But the whole point here between GDPR and PCI and the requirements is that if you're going to be a third-party servicer or a merchant or someone accepting a card, that you either protect it or you don't touch it. Those are the two options. And with this particular technology, we're saying you don't touch it. So no technology that the merchant is responsible for, or their providers, is touching that credit card or that private information using this technology. Therefore, the protection comes in for them.
Excellent. All right. Well, I want to thank everybody for joining today. Rustin, Stephen, Adam, tremendous job, very educational and very informative. And to everybody listening today, we appreciate you joining our webinar and learning more about our combined solution set. You will be receiving an email from me directly with a link to access the video on demand. We expect that will be on the website tomorrow. You have my contact information, and if you have any additional questions, you can reach out directly to me, or you can also email us directly at bd@bluefin.com. Thank you so much, gentlemen.
All right. Thank you all.
Thank you.